Okay. So, actually, I've only been at Circleline for a little over a year at this point. However, I've been a tour guide for almost 18 years. So let's put it this way. I used to take people to the Twin Towers. So you also want to know why I do this, or why I like I like sharing information I have about this city with other people. So that's why.
Okay. Have you ever been to Asian countries?
No, not yet, not yet. A friend of mine who's a Japanese tour guide is sort of muttering something about maybe going there for the Olympics, but we'll see. I haven't gone anywhere in Asia yet. Europe, yes, but not Asia.
Ah, is that right? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I gotta get back on that.
Let's go down here. We have pulled up already. So we are ready to go now. If you're not a fan of loud noises, we're going to make a few. We have to, required by the Coast Guard, let the world know we're coming. So after we pull, and when it opened, some called the Empty State Building, had no tenants above the 38th floor, a bit of a problem for a 102-story building. Now that could have gone bankrupt, and many of the buildings of that era did, but fortunately they had the observation deck, and that turned out to be a huge hit, even during the Great Depression. You know what, it was a cheap, affordable throw. It was only 50 cents a ticket then. So no trip to Europe, kids. We're near the Empire State Building. So many people did that. It provided over half the revenue in the 1930s, and that saved the building from bankruptcy. Now, we call this the Hudson. We're sent here to start a colony. The Dutch sent Henry Hudson here to find a quick and easy passage to India. We found the Hudson River, which is at best a quick and easy passage to Albany. And nobody wanted that, so that mission was basically a failure, but you know what, it gave the Dutch a claim. 15 years later, they came back and made good on that claim, colonized everything we see on this trip, all sides, no state border for them. This is all New Netherlands. There are places in there like Hoboken, Brooklyn, Harlem, those are all Dutch names, but at the center of it all, they put the first colonial city of New Amsterdam, and that's what became the city of New York. That was in 1624. Now, the Hudson River used to be a much busier river than it is now. Not in the Dutch days. Henry Hudson honestly did not find a very useful river, and our first seaport was on the East River because that was close to the ocean. But this became a lot more useful when in the early 19th century we dug a little ditch across New York State. It was a wide state. It was called the Erie Canal. That hooked up the Hudson River Great Lakes, opened the Great Lakes to the ocean through New York Harbor. That made New York City the biggest and busiest port in the world. Also the fact that and sporting facilities. Those guys in the little boxes, they're trying to hit us with golf balls. They took an elevated freight line we had abandoned back in the 80s, and now it's a park, the Highline Park, very successful park, now fully open. From 34th Street down to the Hudson and early steamboats. He was a rival of Robert Fulton. The south end is the train station. That's it. But Hoboken was a major disembarkation point for American soldiers in World War I and World War II. If you were shipped to Europe, you were shipped from there. And the Americans fighting in the trenches of World War I, so there are three places you can end up, and that's like to the top of the World Trade Center site. And that was after 150 years between the two of them. By 1811, we had limped up to there. We were doing it British style, adding one street at a time, fighting over one street at a time. So the rest of the island, we didn't have much going on. There were some things. North of North Street, there was a town, a separate town from New York called Greenwich Village. That was our first suburb in the horse and buggy era. Harlem was around too, but that was so distant, that was summer homes only then. More on that later. The rest was wilderness. So in 1811, we mapped the wilderness. We still have this map. We did a detailed topographical map of the whole island of Manhattan, so we could at least say where all the roads were going to go at the same time. But we looked at all those many hills and thought, wow, that's complicated. You know, forget the hills, just do straight lines. Straight lines, right lines, just number it. And that worked. Filled up the whole island by the end of the 19th century. Let's realize the island is big enough to burst out in the 5 boroughs we have before. Now, I just want to note, we just went over the Holland Tunnel. See those yellow towers in the river on the left and on the right? Those are the ventilation shafts of the Holland Tunnel. And the Holland Tunnel does not go to Holland. No, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Is Jersey City. We named it for the engineer who designed it, Clifford Holland. It was unusual, but this was a big innovation. This was the first underwater tunnel built for cars, opened up in 1928. And we didn't know that would be possible because cars have toxic fumes. So if you're stuck in traffic in the tunnel, this could be really awful. But those height includes that antenna mast on top. See how we're doing? Oh, yeah, there. Boy, that looks good. I see this every day, but that looks good. Anyway, the full official height of the One World Trade Center is 1,776 foot tall. This is symbolic. When we see the Statue of Liberty, she'll be holding a plaque. It will say July 4th, 1776. That's the date of the Declaration of Independence. That's considered the birth of this country. We were just celebrating this like a week ago. I don't know if you noticed the fireworks, but you know, it's kind of a big deal. That's the meaning of the height. Now, that does not make it the tallest building in the world. It is not. However, you can always win a record if you know how to phrase it. Tallest building in New York City, New York State, United States, North America, Western Hemisphere. That's 5 records. Oh, and tallest building, before any Canadians jump on me about the CN Tower, that's not a building. No. That's an antenna with a restaurant impaled on it. We have a bigger antenna in Fargo, North Dakota, just doesn't have restaurants, so nobody cares. I know what you're thinking. Okay, antennas. What about the real roof? All right, it's a fair question. You know, the roof is only about 12 foot taller than the Twin Towers, where you go to the observation deck, you basically arrive at the same height as the old observation deck. And we're building a new World Trade Center. It's all on the grounds of the old World Trade Center. I mean, part of it was set aside for the memorial, but that still left a lot of room to work with. It won't have Twin Towers in the new World Trade Center, but see the diagonal? See, they're already going back. See the diagonal lines on number 1? That is meant to suggest as if the 2 4-sided Twin Towers came together in one 8-sided structure. Now let's take a look out on right again, and you know, I'm pointing out New Jersey. It is a financial district for Jersey City. It's really an extension of the financial district of New York. That's what's on your left, and yes, across state lines, across the river. And a lot of people who work there, they think that's why they call it Exchange Place. Now, that's a great name for a financial district, but that's not why they call it that. That's the name the neighborhood had 100 people. Like many Americans, I have an immigrant stock, and on both sides. Now, my mother's side was earlier, so they would have gone into Battery Park. Castle Clinton, that's where you get the host tickets for fixing up the Statue of Liberty for 100th anniversary. And that was a charitable effort spearheaded by Lee Iacocca. They did a great job raising money. The only problem is they raised too much money. Don't forget the engineer who designed the infrastructure. It was Gustav Eiffel. Yes, the same Eiffel who later did the Eiffel Tower. I think he had credit for this project. Maybe I could do it again without a statue right around it. More people that worked. Now, the statue is a gift to this country for the people of France, not the government of France. Our government's really didn't want that either. But the people of France, by the way, both governments are wary of this strange project too, because it's a political statement after all. But the people of France like the idea. They raised the money. They built the statue in its entirety in France, then broke it into about 300 pieces and shipped it over here. Over here, we the people had to pay for the base. Our government decided to accept the strange gift, and they even threw in the island because they didn't have the island, just a little island. Farmer with the fort built for the War of 1812 they never used. And the fort's still there. The base and the base, that sort of shape is for wood. For our government, it's not going to be done in this way. Well, the people of America like the idea. They raised the money for the base design for the sun. Whole thing, statue and base, opens in 1886. It's entitled Liberty Enlightening the World, a personification of the American ideal of liberty as a Roman goddess, standing triumphant over slavery, British crushing of chains. That represents the chains of slavery. It's conceived in the wake of the American Civil War, they announced the Constitution and end of slavery finally in this country. She's showing that triumph to the whole world, seven spikes in the crown, radiating out to the 7 seas and 7 continents. She looks like she's looking at that bridge. Now, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge was not there until 1964. Well, the Narrows, though, that's the way. And it worked. We had so many guns on the harbor, the British left New York City alone during the War of 1812, sailed down the coast, and burned down Washington, D.C. instead. Not our problem. Hey, there's a little karmic payback for that, too, because, you know, we were the first capital. New York, that's why you walk down Wall Street, a big statue of George Washington. That is where George Washington became President Washington, our first president. Problem is, our first president was a dude from Virginia, so one of the first things his administration did was figure out how to move the capital closer to his house. Now, you see the White Tower just off the coast of Governor's Island? That is the ventilation shaft for the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. We'll go over that next. Might feel a bump. That is our longest underwater oil move. After aging politicians, only once the politician died within a year of receiving the honor. I think it was earlier when they finished the law. Now, that's the industry still there, though media and technology are interfering. In fact, finance has always been our biggest employer. It still is, but there are a lot of people saying that's going to change soon to media and technology. We'll see what happens. Wall Street to the end. It's not a very long street. Now at the end will be an old brownstone church in the middle at the end of Wall Street. Now Wall Street was a wall built by the Dutch along what was the northern edge of their city. That's as far as the city went. It was a military wall built primarily to keep out the British. Well, the British are up in Connecticut. The Dutch knew they were going to attack, and the last know that king, that's okay. He's the king they fired. He never got a mini-series. You don't have to know. He won't be on the test. They took down the wall, made it Wall Street, and put their church where we used to call the mast skyscrapers. It wasn't until we built buildings taller than the ships we called them skyscraper buildings after the ships. But the first thing we built taller than the mast was actually not buildings, but the towers of this bridge coming up now. This is the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Brooklyn Bridge is the first bridge built over the East River. It opens in 1883. That's pretty late in the for a bridge, but remember, back then we're the busiest port in the world, and it's all busy over here too. That's how big the ships were. So any bridge that went over the East River had to go over in one giant leap, so the mast of the ships could fit underneath. No one could build a bridge long enough or high enough for that until someone invented something we now take for granted, and that's the steel cable that holds up the span of this bridge. Yes, someone invented steel cable in the 19th century. His name was John Augustus Roebling, German immigrant working down in Trenton, New Jersey. He's the guy who designed this bridge, and this was the longest bridge in the world when it opened up in 1883, 1,595.5 feet from tower to tower. Using steel cables to hold up the span, but also above 5 stories, this bridge is what makes this whole city possible. As time goes on, we trust the steel more. Now this next bridge coming up, this blue bridge, that's the Manhattan Bridge, 1909. Now the Brooklyn Bridge was 80% stone, 20% metal. By 1909, the bridge is too heavy. Nothing bigger than a van is allowed over the Brooklyn Bridge. We take the Manhattan Bridge. I take vans, buses, double-decker buses, and subway cars go over the Manhattan Bridge. It is thinner, but it has more steel, so it has a lot more strength. And then we have a third bridge up there, and that's the Williamsburg Bridge. I keep all these bridges straight. It's actually pretty easy. Brooklyn, Manhattan, Williamsburg, BMW. Just think of a car you're never going to own and remember the bridges. Now, the Williamsburg Bridge is actually the second of these three. It opens 20 years after the Brooklyn Bridge, but by 1903, we're trusted to steel more, always in iron and stone. Although the appearance did shock people back in 1903. That's the first time we saw the steel out there like that. It's longer than the Brooklyn Bridge by 4.5 feet. They just rounded up to show off. But it's also stronger, and it became opened by 1904 in Manhattan. By 1908, we're building subways out to Brooklyn, out to Queens, over and under the East River. That's all happening within 10 years. Nothing happens within 10 years now. But it all goes back to the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, when the Brooklyn Bridge opened, it was a bridge between two separate cities. The poem writer said it was very well. The air bridge over that twins. That was done so we rapidly go there, and we did. And there were decades in the 19th century where population doubled. Now, if you look at it broken down by the decades, it looks like, okay, we're surging up the on. Residents are leading the charge. Rich residents in front. But they're on the run because chasing them out from the lower parts of Manhattan are industry, commercial interests. When we started the grid plan in 1811, Wall Street was the center of town, and it was a residential street. By 18, in the middle of 42nd Street, there will be people over at Ganser State Park. It would be a bit crowded, frankly, trying to get that picture. Now, if you go to the UN, you're leaving the country. That is international land. Seriously, if you send a postcard from the gift shop, and they have it set up so you can do this, own stamp, own postmark, not the United States. Yeah. And yeah, they moved here in 1951. They started in San Francisco in 1946, only 51 member nations, now 193 full member nations, 2 observers. And you see the flags there, they go, all the flags are there from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, alphabetically in English. And, you know, that varies, so it's I for Ireland, not E for Ire, for example.
Excuse me, guys, you can't be blocking the stair.
That superheroes will be children here from time to time. This is the first Spider-Man. There's a new park at the bottom. That's the Four Freedoms Park, which was inspired by a 1945 speech of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. His name. Also, that speech is part of the park is designed to basically. This was like the Hamptons of its day. This was one of a number of mansions for the wealthy that were summer homes. They would take boats up the East River to come here in the summertime. The fastest way to get here. Now this one survived because the Gracie family left the mansion to the city. They used to use it as a museum. But then in the 1940s, well, we had a mayor named Fiorello LaGuardia, and he got us through the Great Depression, World War II. Many consider him to be our greatest mayor. But he's a man of humble origins. You know, many of our mayors before that, they were rich guys. They would have big fancy mansions in the city, and they put out lanterns in front, kind of way saying the mayor lives here. LaGuardia lived in some tiny apartment with his wife, you know. But it didn't bother him, but it bothered some members of administration. His parks commissioner, a man named Robert Moses, said, look, we got the nice mansion, why don't you take that? He said, well, I don't want to take it. I don't transitory. They're hard to find unless you know where they used to be. Because they're pushed out or knocked down. Phil Kate did that. So he went around Harlem. He snatched up the leases from next to nothing. The other guys were. He took the big places off the side of the small places like the Monster War, where he started to replicate out to his own people. Working out on the Black Crystal, there's a place called Harlem where you can live, but also even subdivided. You can live there together cheaper than any place else in the United States. Blacks started coming here from first from other parts of the city, other parts of the region, other parts of the country, other parts of the hemisphere, now even other parts of the world. There's a neighborhood in Harlem called Africa, people straight from Africa. And that's what triggers the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s and 30s. Now, the Harlem Renaissance was not just about black soul and liberal soul, jazz, school of literature, school of painting, all social displaced in that era. And also, it really made Harlem a symbol of the best possible neighborhood. This is the Manhattan Project chart. It goes right back to the history, which is still really interesting. That's where you find the they still have a Richard Branson, which is a nice ticket that show to watch if you get there. Now we have a little thin body road. That's called the Bronx Clean Dominion Road. There's a river in New York City. And we now call it the Bronx River because there was a place where he became a resident. Now, he did not last very long in the scene. But in the old days, we were right across the street from the old Yankee Stadium. You want to see how you can tell where the old Yankee Stadium was? We had a steam pipe called Neighborhood's Tobacco. It looked like a giant baseball bat. That's the back. That steam pipe with the three white stripes. That was by the entrance of the old Yankee Stadium. Meet me at the back is what you're saying with your friends. Go see a Yankee game. You can still see a Yankee game. They have a small pipe across the street. Although this is the thing, that looks very much like the old Yankee Stadium, but you go inside, big difference. Not so many seats. No cheap seats. That ain't part of the baseball economy anymore. Frankly, the seats are not the big, so just don't walk in there wearing a Red Sox cap. That could be dangerous. I mean, the Bronx lots there were nice people. I understand the Red Sox cap. Now, what happened? Well, we had three of the best teams in baseball in the 1940s. We had the Yankees, we had the Giants, they were still good. Every year, I think it was 1 year they accepted, but by the time you got to the World Series, at least one of those teams would be in the World Series and not. But the other two teams were being overshadowed by the Yankees. So first the Dodgers left in 1957. Less than a year, and Yankees sort of not trying to we had a big problem in this country. The colonial days and the early federal early years of this country that most of the cities and towns did not have this. New York particularly did not have this. So what do we do? And also, look at it this way. Before the American Revolution, well, it was a problem. I mean, we're getting drunk. In the 1830s, we drank a lot of this. But in a more serious note, it wasn't just about drinking. It was so about so we had to work on this in a lot of places today. We found a reservoir out of the it's sort of called the Crater Reservoir. It's actually nothing more than it's made of 30 million people in Minnesota. One promise is 38 miles upstate. So what they did in 1848, they built the rolling stone road up a slight decline all the way from there. You see that tower up to the left, that's part of the system too. That tower is a giant pump. Water would come across the three pipes on the bridge and then get pumped back up. Remember, New York City is miles down the island. When it got all the way down there, you go all the way down to City Hall Park, just off the Brooklyn Bridge. There's a fountain from 1848. That was the fountain, was part of the system. They simply set up the fountain just to show the city the waters here. Now up here, they had a very attractive bridge, and there really wasn't anything going on up there. But they said, let's go on the top of the right. this was intensely popular in the 1970s. They would take road trips from New York City up to here just to walk over the high bridge. Now in the 1970s, as those who are in trouble up there, we can acknowledge them. Okay. And with that, almost all the bridges are walkable. Not every bridge is walkable. This bridge, the Alexander Hamilton Bridge, is part of the crosswalk expressway, so they let you walk on the highway. And there was a railroad bridge earlier, there'll be another one later. But every other bridge we go on now, there's a lot of bridges you can walk over. I've walked over them all, on the same day. That's a long walk, but you can walk over most things. The Washington Bridge here, you can walk over. Now we have gotten north of Harlem and we have hit the heights. This is Washington Heights. And these are the highest natural elevations on the island. It goes up to 200. Thanks to the Ice Age. Long Island, that was the terminal moraine. Basically, that's how far the glaciers went down the east coast, pushing the dirt that became Long Island firm. Then as the glaciers pulled back, it rips through the land, water fills in and makes these, well, estuaries we call rivers, but they're not really rivers. And rips through the rock itself. Remember, we have that hard Manhattan schist, but here it just rips through, and it's these standing shards of rock that to the Europeans that came here, one of ours now, we appreciate it. In fact, we were a little upset. You see one guy found, oh wait, I'm 5 foot over the park line. Yeah, that one got by us, okay? And we were really upset about that. So when this tech company said, oh, we're going to build our headquarters towering over, we had a little talk. They're still building over there, but we're not going to see it because we want to keep the view. Some things you see like that building up there, that actually is a monastery, literally. So that fits the theme. Yeah, we like the view too, so we'll be a little more vigilant on keeping it. And Fort Tryon Park, by the way, that's a very, because of the terrain of Washington Heights, it's a very three-dimensional park, and a real sight of how three-dimensional that neighborhood can get. If you take the subway to go up to the cloisters, it's 190th Street Station. But make sure you get out of the right side if you want to go to the cloisters. If you're on one side of the station, it's right at the subway level, okay? Now, you want to go to the cloisters, you got to find this elevator that takes you 190 feet up to go out the other side of the same station. 190 feet difference in heights, two sides of the same station. Basically, it's built into a cliff face. Now we're coming up to our final bridge, bridge number 20. By the way, while we're doing 20 bridges, we passed over 21 tunnels. I don't know if you're counting the bumps. But that is the George Washington Bridge, or GWB. Now, the books say this finished in 1931. Okay, that's a little misleading for the reason I'm about to explain. Now, they'll say designed by Oath Muhammad. That's all right. He definitely did design this. That's been there since 1921, long before the bridge was here. And it served a very important purpose. See, that's a jetty of rocks. Now, the industrial piers didn't come up anywhere near here. They stopped probably on a few miles south. But the Angela Erie Canal is well north of here. So this, in the old days, this was full of boats, day immigrants to completed all the way in at that point. At this point, you might think of making your last purchases at the bar, the Sky Bar, doing this to soon thereafter. I also think of making your last trips to the bathroom too. That's something I don't really want to do. gave the church to the city. They kept the parking garage, which I was saying. Now that tower is a bell tower. I mean, this office is for 20 floors, then the top 6 floors are all bells. And that is a carillon. That's an assortment of 2 bells you play from a keyboard. 74 bells in the Riverside Church carillon. By range, the biggest carillon in the world. Its base bell is the largest tuned bell in the world. It weighs over 20 tons. And I remember, this is all in the past tense, but I remember taking groups up to, there's an observation deck on top there. An elevator taking up to the 20 floors. They had to walk through the bells up to the top. Those bells would go off every 50 minutes until when the big one goes off. But you look out, open windows over the river, over Harlem. It was only $2 a ticket. Actually, if I brought a group of like over a dozen, I said, hey, just a buck ahead. Oh, the tour guide was always free. I went there on my own. All in the past tense. It says the park is supposed to look like nature, or idealize nature like nature. I don't guarantee this. Now, if you go to Central Park, you see by the side the world is really living place. You forget the buildings. That was a part of history. We're a 5-story city. And that was 2 kinds of buildings. Tenements, that's what you see in the Lower East Side, Chinatown. And row houses, that's what you see in like Greenwich Village and parts of Brooklyn, Harlem. Those were single-family houses, okay? Now, when the Brooklyn Bridge went up, we figured out how to build bigger buildings. At first, office buildings, but then we thought, wait, we can build residential buildings. Bigger than any residential building was built before. But this was a new thing, and they want to focus people out of the old thing. And not the people in the tenements, the people in the brownstones. So, not only were these beautiful buildings inside and out, but you didn't want the people in brownstones to feel we're giving anything up. So your apartment would have the same number of rooms your brownstone did. We're talking over 20 rooms to an apartment. I mean, they'll say like a 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom. That's like 5 bedrooms and 6 servants' rooms. Extra rooms, libraries, offices, all this, room after room after room after room after room. Now, believe it or not, after World War II, people were leaving this neighborhood too. Again, it wasn't just the Bronx. Everyone was leaving the city. Also, these areas were redlined pretty much as well, so... It was in Hell's Kitchen in the 70s, okay? He's lucky he's still with us, okay? There's a little context there that's very important. But that's how it went. Now, there was a documentary last year on HBO. It was about Harry Belafonte. And they shot this scene at the beginning for the documentary. It's a contemporary scene. And they didn't explain that the documentary what was going on. Now, I read the reviews and I knew what was going on. It's just a scene of him wistfully wandering this empty apartment through room after room. That was his 5 stories though. The plumbing didn't work. So, that's still off the same system, but the power pumped up to the tanks, and they used wooden water tanks to clean the water a little further, keep it a good medium temperature, and then gravity brings it down. It's all the water for all your sinks, your toilets, your kitchen, bathroom, all that. They eventually made it continuously pumping too. You know, they have like floats like in the old toilet, so it goes too low, they power pump more water in there. Now you might say, yeah, but they're not all wooden water tanks. I mean, there's some of those got fancy castles on top. No, those are wooden water tanks too. They've got fancy castle shells on them. And in these modern buildings, they got wooden water tanks too, but inside where you can't see them. And in the big stick building, there's wooden water tanks in there as well. Why wood? You know, we have tried other materials. Nothing works as well as the wood, so it's still wood. And Riverside Park, that ended right there about 72nd Street. This was actually a big rail yard. Actually, the rails went up along the park. When Volks and Olmsted did, there was still a railway visibly open. Again, we were looking for parkland to work on. Robert Moses built the park out as over the train tracks. The trains are running underneath as a tunnel. And then they put platforms over the trains here. Initially, the idea was they were going to extend the park, but that was when we ran into the 70s and other things. A, we didn't have any money to build any more parkland. The railroad went out of business. Actually, they weren't running trains through those tunnels for a number of decades. They are running them again. For a number of decades, if you're wondering what's going on with the tunnel, people were living in there. Now, sometimes the books about these exaggerate the numbers, but this was a place, and there have been documentaries about it too. It's called the Freedom Tunnel. My estimate would be there was about 250 people living underground in this tunnel, which is extending all underneath Riverside Park. Now, when the Amtrak reclaimed the rails, they had to move the people out, and they did. And actually, a lot of them got moved into better housing and whatnot. You know, we're not as reckless with that sort of thing as we used to be. But if you take the trains, the Amtrak trains that go through the tunnel, if you keep your eyes open, you'll see like old graffiti, old signs of the whole community that used to be under there. But now, this is Riverside South, by the way. That's where we first said, let's do a more upscale project on the waterfront. Again, we were still coming out of the mindset that you didn't want to live there. And you'll see even, because that started in the north, it gets shinier and shinier as the later buildings were the recently. And now it gets very shiny indeed. And look at that. This is 57th Street, and that building on the waterfront. This is like the most talked about building it's still not done yet, but when it went up last year, everyone was talking about this. This is by hot Danish architect Bjarke Ingels, and that building has made him the hottest architect in the business. It's not a pyramid, it's tetrahedron. He gets very touchy about that. But this got him so hot. Down at the World Trade Center site, now, they have not yet started building number 2 World Trade Center. They had a design in place by Sir Norman Foster. Last year, they fired Sir Norman Foster and hired Bjarke Ingels to do a whole new design. By the way, Sir Norman Foster found out about this the same way I did, by reading about it in the New York Times. Yeah, keep it classy, Port Authority. Oh, and we're back down to Pier 90, and as promised, let's talk about the Miracle on the Hudson, because that is where Flight 1549 touched down. Okay, so that day, well, it wasn't supposed to come here. It was a routine flight out of LaGuardia. But then the engines got taken out by evil Canada geese. Yeah, any Canadians here, it's time you gotta take those geese back with you. Come on, man. We'll keep the beaver, but you gotta take back the geese. This boat, the Manhattan, was one of the first boats on the scene that day. This boat had the job of actually, since the fire boats weren't close enough, we brought the fire and EMTs out to the plane. We had a number of boats around. It was like a circle of boats around the boat. As the boat was in motion, it was in motion while we get everyone on the plane. We didn't get the last guy off till it was down by Pier 76, that grave. And that's the better part of a mile. Last guy off was Sully, you know, with his jacket button his hat on. I mean, nothing to get excited about. It kept going down, almost all the way down to the World Trade Center site, before it finally came to rest. And now it's not there anymore. We got out of the river, and now you can see Flight 1549 at a museum in North Carolina. Yeah, not the